Good morning, everybody, and hope you're all well. And welcome to our, I think this is, as Model Office, this is our 7th SM&CR webinar this year. Now, you'll have to forgive me. It's my first day in the saddle post summer holidays, so I'm a bit rusty. I do apologise. As you may have seen, we had it up as Monday, the 27th of August. It's actually Tuesday today. Hope you had a great bank holiday. And really today is all about the how. We want to look at really how to implement this all-encompassing regime. It's, as I keep on banging on about, it's the biggest, probably the most personally impactful piece of regulation that I've witnessed in my 27 years in this industry. And we really want to take a look at not just the what, but the how. We're running this with Helen Clark from Mint Blue Consulting, who has done a whole load of great work around project planning, which is really a sweet spot of what she does and Mint Blue do. And I'll be handing over to Helen a bit later on in the webinar, around about 10:30, so that she can take you through the project planning style of what you need to be implementing to make sure this works for you. We are recording this, so we will put this onto our RegTech channel after this on YouTube and share it out with you. And also Helen will, and myself will be talking about the implementation pack that we've constructed across everything and more that we'll talk about today, which is available to purchase through us. So without further ado, let's move on. Really what we're talking about here is how the SM&CR implementation program that hopefully you've now started, or at least started to look at. Maybe today will give you a nudge in that direction. We've only got a few months left to get this right. So really it's looking at the impact across the business. There are three parts to the regime: the senior managers regime, who needs to fall into that and who doesn't, looking at the certification regime, who you need to certify, looking at the conduct rules and how they need to be trained into the relevant staff in your business. So it's all about systems and controls, but looking at also the consequences of getting it wrong, which are huge, and the ramifications are huge, as we'll see. Making sure that you get on and do the right things with your business and continue to do business in the marketplace while implementing this is very important. This is something that banks had big problems with when they brought this in 2016, and also looking really at the how you can put together a root and branch review. What we're finding in the marketplace, and this is why Model Office exists, we want to move away from checklist tick box compliance into an area of understanding holistically how everything fits together, so you're building a balanced scorecard, if you like, across all the rules and regulations, which unfortunately they're vast, and it's raining regulations, as I'm sure we all know. But most importantly, what we want to do is get you into a position where you know how everything fits, and as you'll see from this, we'll mention other rules and regulations, particularly like MiFID II, and how that fits into this as well. So what does SM&CR, what does the FCA, if they come in to do a visit on your business tomorrow, and they want to look at the SM&CR and see where you are and what you're doing, they want to look at how you're implementing across these key areas. They want to know who the senior people are in the industry and what they're responsible for, and how that's outlaid in your statements of responsibility, which we'll talk about. Looking at making sure that you've got the right people in the right place with the right roles and the right responsibilities. That the SM&CR is really about two key areas. It's about the capabilities of the individuals in the business. Do they have the right skills to enact their activities and their roles, and do they have the right behaviours, the right conduct in place? They're really looking at making sure that the high levels of accountability are there within the firm, so the onus is on you as a business now to prove that you're compliant, rather than the other way around as it used to be with the FCA proving coming in and basically the FCA proving that you're doing harm. It's the other way around. You have to say, look, we're not actually in a position that we're going to cause any harm into the marketplace. because we've got the right systems and controls in place. And the final thing is that the FCA will hold you as individuals to account if they see you are wanting. And the key area is with the SM&CR is what you've got to look at is that this is their trump card. Basically, you know, non-compliance with the SM&CR is not a, you know, you just cannot, you know, do that. You're now in a position where effectively the SM&CR will send you to a place where you don't want to be. It will be looking at, you know, Section 166 reviews. It will be looking at where, you know, you might be getting fines. And we've already seen, you know, for example, with one of the top 4 banks where their CEO was fined some £600,000 a couple of years ago now for trying to stop a whistleblower within the business. And this is going to get worse as we move through. And the reason why that is quite simply that the SM&CR is a move away from civil law into the area of the FCA holding full discretion about how it applies its standards within your business and a root and branch review of the business. It's totally enforceable. Thus, you need to prove that you comply. So the burden of proof is on you. It's high levels of accountability. Yes, moving on to 3 components. The first component, which we'll talk about, we'll break it down into these 3 key areas when we talk about, you know, how to implement the SM&CR. And the first area is the senior managers regime, which is effectively looking at pre-approval by the FCA, how that's done, responsibilities that apply, which is looking at the statements of responsibilities, the duty of responsibility and prescribed responsibilities, fit and proper criminal checks and regulatory references. You need to go back 6 years now. We'll talk about how that kind of fits with your senior managers that you've got within your business. Next is the certification regime. So this really covers those who are not senior managers but can cause what's called significant harm to the firm and the clients in the market. So really it's all those who are maybe giving advice to clients, for example, involved in certain activities of qualified activities within the business. So from that perspective, the difference here from the APER regime, the approved persons regime, is that we're moving through to a scenario where everybody needs to be certified each year and every year, and you need a system in place to make sure that happens, and you're not going to drop any balls around that area, which you cannot do. Finally, but not least, is the conduct rules, and you know, this is all about a high level of standards of behaviour that you need your all staff to exhibit and to showcase, you know, that they've got the right skills and the right behaviours. They're walking their talk, if you like, in and around what their activities are. There are 2 tiers to this. The first tier is individual tier, which you'll all know from your APER approved persons regime. The second tier is more about the senior managers and how they are managing breaches around the SM&CR. We've then got training and competence and reasonable steps. So training and competence and reasonable steps really is all about making sure that your training program is set within your business to a high level, so it covers everything that the SM&CR is all about, and that your senior managers know the reasonable steps that they need to take in case of any breach. That is, you know, set in stone by the SM&CR, and you need to know that and need to know how to do that and how to implement that moving forward. We've then got to move through to what's new. So we've got over the summer, the FCA came out with the final rules in association with the SM&CR, and it really covered these 4 key areas. But if you're I suspect, I mean, having looked at the list of attendees today, there's no enhanced firms on there. Please ping me an email if you are an enhanced firm, and correct me if I'm wrong. But really, the key areas, if you're a limited scope and a core firm, are looking at the clarification of the requirements and the scope of certification regime. So that is good news, because what this looks at in the certification world is effectively amending the scope of what's called the client dealing function, which provides you with full flexibility in judgment to certify a role. And that is important, because you've got to look at what people do within your business. You know, are they giving advice or not? Are they a power planner, for example, giving advice? Are they moving into that realm of, you know, using their discretion and judgment and engaging clients in that way? If so, then there's a question mark. Should they be certified or not? And you need to answer that, and then obviously document why you're certifying or why you're not certifying. We've then got extension of the Senior Management Conduct Rule SFC 4, which we'll talk about in a minute, to non-approved executive directors, and they apply to limited scope firms now. So really that is all about effectively understanding that if you apply NEDs, non-exec directors, or your executive directors within the firm, they will need to be basically apply to be senior managers within the business. So that is core to that. We've then got really the next one is all about the legal function, which really applies to enhanced firms, and that's not required under the senior manager regime. And finally, but not least, is the new directory that's coming out, which the FCA are bringing out. And this really is that the information must be provided by firms, and it's set out in the final rules and includes, for example, national insurance numbers, passport numbers, directory persons, which effectively at the moment with the register, what we've got is an issue where we're moving away, from a whole broad spread of people being in the register to bringing it back to the people that matter from the SM&CR perspective. So senior manager certification people, certified people. You need to know what those dates are, what you need to submit information on the directory. The unfortunate thing here is there could be a lag. So with the SM&CR, core firms, limited scope firms, for example, solo firms, you are not actually required to complete that process until December 2020. So potentially there could be people who are currently on the register who won't appear on the directory for about a year, which I guess isn't good news. But the most important thing is that you know it and you know the system of how to make sure that you've got the right people who are registered on that directory by that date. So let's just very briefly talk about, the key issues that we're dealing with here. Well, the first most important area is knowing your firm categorization. The FCA have a great planning tool. What you'll see on our slides here, we've got what we call planning points, key planning points, top tips, if you like, that you can take away today, start to apply to your business, and all this is embellished far more by our project plan that you can purchase online. So really what we've got here is 3 tiers: limited scope firms, core firms, and enhanced firms. And you should know this already. And if you don't know it, get onto the FCA website, look at their online tool, and find out, going through a very simple diagnostic that they've created, that you can find out what type of firm that you are. As I said, looking down at the list of participants today, it's limited scope and core firms, really. And you just need to be careful about, if you're a limited scope firm, for example, you might actually be flipping over into core firm status at some stage. So, and conversely, core firm, if you're downsizing as a business, you might then flip into limited scope firm. So there's different things that you need to be aware of within these key areas. And those are called elements. And these are the SM&CR elements that we've listed for you. Everything that we list here is in our pack and is in the guides that we've produced that you can download and read. And here what we're looking at is the 17 elements that apply across the regime. Well, if you look at the core and limited scope firms, there's quite a lot for you to really ensure that you know and get your head around and how it applies to your business. So really, the planning point on this slide is all about responsibility mapping is good practice. Core firms and limited scope firms, you're not obliged to, role map what the people do in your business. You don't have to submit that to the FCA, for example, but we're saying it's good practice to do it. And in fact, the rules actually do stipulate, just to take a look at the rule book, SYSC 2.1 actually basically requires you as a business to be clear who has the responsibilities in the business and that your business affairs are monitored. So really, role mapping has always been a requirement in more ways than one for all firms, but we see it as good practice when it comes down to the SM&CR. Breaking down the regime, well, the senior managers regime itself, we need to be aware of what the key areas are for all the senior managers who are within your business. From that perspective, you need to understand who is a senior manager, and allocating responsibilities to the senior managers is important, and that comes in the form of statements of responsibility. You need to map out those statements of responsibility. We have a system which we call ARCs, which is all about breaking it down to 4 key areas. Statements of responsibility are not a job description. They are really looking at what is important for you as a business, and for the individuals who hold those responsibilities about what they're actually doing in their roles. So it's not a job description. And what does ARCS mean? Well, ARCS is all about actionable. So looking at really identifying clear accountability and responsibility, what is actionable within their role. Reflective is the next one, which looks at their role, the responsibility, and the work of the individual in relation to the firm, to your business. Clarity looks at clearly described accountability and responsibilities. And finally, succinct is all about containing relevant information. Again, not a job description. The important thing here is that, well, the statements of responsibilities are reviewed annually, and you need to be doing that on an annual basis. Again, that's not prescribed by the SM&CR. It's good practice, but we see that as important because people's jobs change and their responsibilities will change. You might get new people coming in with new skill sets. So that's the type of thing that you need to be looking at from a good practice point of view, reviewing annually the statements of responsibilities you're putting together for your senior managers. They have a duty of responsibility to take reasonable steps. What does that mean? Well, in case of any breaches around the SM&CR with certification, conduct rules, and so forth, the senior managers have a duty of responsibility to show that they're taking reasonable steps. And those reasonable steps are in the conduct rules, which we'll go through in a minute. So it's all prescribed, it's all laid out for you. You just need to know where to find it. You also have the fit and proper assessment procedures, which we'll talk about, and the development, training, and technology and communication strategy within your firm is very important to actually put in. There's also a 12-week rule, which is important to know. 12-week rule, what is it? Well, that means if someone leaves or goes on maternity leave, whatever, then you have 12 weeks to bring someone in who can fulfill that role for that period before you appoint someone permanently into that role. So all this is in our pack. All this is in the reports and the guides that we've got. But this is just a broad overview of what you need to now be looking at from a senior manager's perspective. The idea is that you know the types of roles within your business and you map those out. When it comes down to statements of responsibility, we have a whole case study, or case studies, should I say, in our pack around how to do it, how to map out the individual roles and responsibilities from a senior management point of view and a certification point of view. That's all in our pack, and you can download that and then apply it to your business, and away you go. The key area with the senior manager's functions, this is looking at an example from a core firm, for example. You need to look at 2 key areas, really. The governing functions. So here you've got examples of the chief executive, executive directors, partners and chairs within the business. And then you've got the required functions, which is the compliance oversight and the money laundering reporting officer, the old CF10s, etc., which you now need to map across. Now, this will generally be automatic and look at it from that point of view. You will basically have people who are already doing the CF10 role. You just map them across to the SM&16. But you need to have a formal plan to do that. You need to document it. The most important thing with the SM&CR is you document everything that you're doing. You hold it on file, whether that's done paper or paperless. It's up to you, but that needs to be done. So from that point of view, really what we're looking at is making sure that all the SMF roles within your business, senior management function roles, are covered, and they're covered also, and how it maps across, again, taking this holistic view, if you like, how it maps across the 3 parts of the regime, the senior manager regime, how that fits into the certification regime, and how that fits into the conduct rules. It's all very important for you to know and how all that fits. Prescribed responsibilities, again, are very important. Ideally, who should have the prescribed responsibilities is the most senior person who's responsible in that area. What are they? Well, you can see they're listed here. Core firms have kind of 7 areas that you need to focus on, but you'll find in there that some areas you might not have responsibility for that. So CAS, for example, client assets, you might not hold it, so therefore number 5 comes out. So you need to look at this, how it applies to the individuals in your business and what you do as a business, and then who should hold that prescribed responsibility. Ideally, they should not be shared, but if they are and have to be shared or divided, then you need to document how that's done and why it's being done. So the other thing to mention as well, as a limited scope firm, you do not have to actually have prescribed responsibilities. But if you are a limited scope firm, it's worthwhile knowing what they are, because they will blend across to what you are responsible for within your role under the SM&CR. If you, for example, you're classed as a senior manager in the business. The final thing I'll mention on senior managers is really looking at role mapping. This is really important, and again, it's good practice. You should be doing it anyway in the business. That's what SYSC 2.1 is all about. But again, you don't have to, but we see it as good practice within the business to showcase, if the SAA come knocking, that you know who does what and how it all blends in and affects everybody within the business moving forward. Just a key area about outsourcing. Research and due diligence is important on that. Every firm that we come across in the industry outsources. It's great practice to outsource. You might outsource your client, your investment proposition. You might outsource for technology within the business. So from that point of view, you need to ensure that you've got the clear ownership of the relationship between the outsourced supplier and you as a business. Looking at how the contract's set out, looking at the service level agreements, the KPIs. And looking at how those agreements are reviewed, and from that point of view, what we're saying here is all about accountability, because the burden of proof is upon you in case anything should go wrong. So if you're outsourcing to an investment provider, for example, and something goes wrong around the advice that's given, then from a senior management's point of view, you need to understand what's happened, why it's happened, and then what you need to do to put that right. And having a good, robust research and due diligence program outsourcing any relationship is crucial within this. Non-exec directors, I've touched on before. Non-exec directors, the key area with non-exec directors, many of you might not have them, but if you do, then it really is all about their influence on the business. And they do apply now to limited scope firms, as mentioned earlier on. So the issue with this is that you need to understand what they actually do, and are they having a significant influence on the decision making in the business from an accountability point of view, and therefore they may need to come through into the SMF regime. Moving on to the certification regime, here we've got some key areas that you need to be aware of. Firstly, map out the functions, map out how that applies across the people that you've got employed or you work with within your business. And you can see here that the approved person or equivalent is factored into this table on the right hand side, and that is very important for you to do as an exercise, because you need to understand how the approved person regime then shifts across the certification regime. And what we've done there is looked at the function, the approved person's equivalent, and then the description of why that's important. So for example, client dealing, CF30, and how that applies across to the new regime. There, you've got to be careful of key areas such as crossovers to other regulations. So MiFID II, information givers is an important one. Who are information givers? Anybody who could be touching, engaging with, for example, clients and construed as giving advice. From my experience in 10 years as an advisor and 5 years as a wealth manager, clients have got very select memories and they can point fingers, and therefore we've got to be very aware of when we think we might be giving advice. And that comes down to what I mentioned earlier on about judgment. If you're looking at judgment being applied to any particular client, a suitability report, letter, or whatever, and that then comes back at the para planner, for example, then potentially they're classed as information giver and they may need to go through a certification process. What we've constructed within our pack is what we call life cycling. And it's very important, from a business to look at how all this fits together. Again, we're moving away from checklist tick box, compliance into an area of looking at how it all fits together across the regime. So here what we've got is a life cycle across the certification regime. Now, I'm not going to go through everything here because you will get copies of the slides and you'll also get a copy of the live webinar recording, and you can also get this information from our pack. But the most important thing here is this looks at the life cycle really of a staff member, going through identification of the role all the way through to maybe they're leaving the role. And what you need to understand here really effectively is understanding, identifying those who can cause significant harm, how they're certified, redesigning the training and competence plan, and including annual reviews and maybe personal development plans for those individuals, so that everything that they are doing is documented. I can't emphasize that enough. You need to make sure that you're documenting everything that people are doing within the business, in a clear and concise way, and mapping that back to the senior manager's regime, from a statements of responsibility point of view, to make sure that they're supervised correctly. So there's all that stuff that you need to be looking at from that point of view, and that's what this slide really emphasizes. Moving finally to the conduct area before I hand over to Helen. The conduct regime, you will know this from your APER principles and guidance. The individual conduct rules really haven't changed: integrity, duty, care, and diligence, communications with the regulators, TCF, customer interests, and standards of market conduct. They're all the same pretty much, but you've then got, if you're a senior manager, you've got your 4-tier rules here. And this is where taking reasonable steps is important, because what the FCA are saying is that you now need to ensure that you are identifying all the risks within your business where you could potentially go into breach on the SM&CR. And that will mean that the first 3 areas are all about effectively taking reasonable steps to manage any breaches, ideally to stop them in their tracks, stop them before they happen. And again, in our pack, what we've got is a breach log, which is an example of how you can put that together pretty effectively and efficiently across key breaches that may appear within your business as you go forward with this regime. And again, we've life cycled this, so you can take a look at the life cycle of your staff within your business, and looking at practical planning points. It's really about ensuring that conduct, the behaviour of people, there's a baseline set within the business, so that you've benchmarked the right rule, the right conduct, the right behaviour, the desired behaviour, and then you need to look at how these rules apply to the jobs themselves, ensure that reasonable steps are understood by your senior managers. You've got a breach log, and then any follow-up actions and management information reviews are conducted in the right way. So again, that is all available through our pack. You'll get copies of the slides, so you can read that through at your leisure. But again, really, I can't emphasize this enough. Move away from checklist tick box. Understand how all this fits together, so that as you go as a business and you start to implement this going forward, that you know how everything fits together, and then you've got it documented in the right way, so that you are really covered from an accountability point of view, as I say, from your compliance sides, and if the FCA ever come knocking. Auxiliary staff, finally, it's really important to know who's not in the regime. This is important from a training and competence point of view, because you don't really training people and spending time and money on training the wrong people. And this is just an example of the people who aren't involved in this regime. And the FCA have been very prescriptive on this, and that is unusual for the FCA, as I'm sure you know. So it's really important to know who isn't involved in the regime, and that is all listed again in our pack. And finally, but not least, taking a look at those reasonable steps. What are they? How do they work? What do they mean? Well, really, from a reasonable step perspective, what we're talking about there is looking at effectively, what the FCA will do, how they will take action against a senior manager. They will take action if there's a breach. They will take action against the person who holds the senior management function that's responsible for that area that's been breached, and they'll take action if reasonable steps aren't taken. So you need to know those conduct rules, as I say, those 3 key areas about taking reasonable steps, and looking at key considerations. Clarity of roles and responsibilities, nature and complexity of the business. Looking at oversight arrangements, delegation of duties is very important. How you hand over, if you're handovering is not a word. How you hand over responsibility is important as well. And having all that documented is key and crucial. And steps on taking new responsibility is important. If you're taking on new levels of responsibility, what steps you need to take, and document that. And look at any collective decision making. You've got committees, how those committees are set up, investment management committees, boards, that type of thing. How you're basically ensuring that the level of responsibility and accountability is really good and meets all the requirements that we've talked about. So what the FCA will consider when it's looking at reasonable steps is your statements of responsibilities, your responsibilities map. Although you're not required to do it, it's important, I think, that you should. It's good practice. It will help you. It will save you in this regime. So again, that's important. Looking at operations and how responsibilities are allocated, looking at all the roles and responsibilities and reference records, and finally, looking at the relationship between the senior management functions responsibilities and those of other senior management functions within the business. So you can see how it's all starting to interrelate. Another point on interrelation, just finally from me, is you've got the product governance rules, otherwise as known as PROD under MiFID II, which is all about the market, the target market criteria for product manufacturers and how that applies to your clients, and how you're marrying that up in your client segmentation piece to make sure that the advice that you're giving matches that target market criteria from a product manufacturing point of view. That's not easy to do because the product manufacturers aren't necessarily communicating their target market criteria very well. But that is a big issue, because if you're giving advice, then if you're not getting that right, that can cause problems in suitability and then cause maybe a breach within the SM&CR. So there's all these things that you need to be taking into account when you're applying it. Okay, so finally, I'm going to move over and hand over to Helen. So if I can bring Helen in now, and Helen will talk to you, if I can find Helen on the system. Here she is, and Helen, over to you. Hi, Helen.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear. Off you go.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Thanks very much, Chris, for a very informative half-hour and overview on the senior managers regime. My name is Helen Clark, and I own Mint Blue Consulting, which offers tailored project management consultancy and training, primarily for companies and financial services. Had a good opportunity to work with Chris in the model office on the senior managers regime, so I'm going to cover off very much the how as opposed to the what. So got one or two practical examples to cover off through with you, and this is all ahead of the December deadline. So Chris is kindly going to drive my slides, so if I can ask you to move on to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you very much. So I think one of the key questions, and it's often asked, and I always get this all the time, why do you need a project? Well, I've been talking to a number of people in the industry, some of whom have been through the process already, some are just starting to think about it, some are halfway through. So one of my friends happens to be chief actuary at a leading insurance company now. They've already been through the process, and we were chatting earlier in the year, and he said how much his responsibilities have increased with all the changes. He has an extended team, they're required to predict the future in actuarial terms, and he's very much aware he's now potentially personally liable in the event of a breach. He did actually go a bit pale at this point as we were talking through. An ex-colleague of mine, Mark, mentioned that he's now a NED for several companies, and he's to become an exec director of another. So we were talking through the new regime, and he realised that no one had actually discussed his roles with him and the new level of responsibility required as a NED. And that's a common conversation I've had with quite a few people recently. After the discussion, I had a very interesting conversation back in February with a compliance person who actually challenged the need for a project. As far as he was concerned, it was a straight mapping exercise, and they were already halfway through, which was absolutely great. The reality is that every firm is different. There's different sizes, different requirements. But the reality is the liability has changed, now can be applied to individuals, and they can be fined, as demonstrated by the Barclays CEO, who was fined $321,000 last year just in breaches. So there are different requirements depending on how you are, and you need it structured in a project so you understand what you need to cover off. So if we just move on to the next slide. So one of the first steps is to think about who actually needs to be involved in that project team. When it's actually advisable to have a core team. In this instance, this will probably be a minimum of 3 people, so we're not talking about making this onerous, it's about being practical. Starting at the top, HR, the key in this project to help advise where people are changing their roles and to assist with the statements of responsibility. It might be they need a new piece of software in to help with all of this. Clients will be involved, it's FCA legislation, they are very strong stakeholders in this. And training, there might not be a separate training area in your company, but there will be somebody who's responsible for making sure that happens. The ultimate responsibility is going to rest with the senior manager who's appointed to that, but it's also making sure the certification staff within the firms are also trained as well. Senior management are also involved as they need to be the decision makers, and they're going to be the people with the most responsibility. Even if this is a straight mapping exercise, as this previous compliance person said, it still needs to be confirmed with the individuals involved. They may not want to take on necessarily the responsibilities that they're being asked to take on or wish to review that. Meeting weekly, either face-to-face or by conference phone, even for half an hour, will help keep this work on track. As I always say, the devil is in the detail. I've been advising a large financial services firm on their project, which was originally sitting with compliance, and we've actually worked through this diagram. So it's all about tailoring the teams as required to fit your particular model. If we then move on to the next slide, it's about having a think about your project team requirements and actually what the project then looked like. This slide is a very high level list through. And this is also reflected in the project plan, which is part of the template pack, which is available for purchase. So it shows the different key tasks and the suggested order of events. We're going to look at this in a little bit more detail in the time we have allowed. So it makes sense to check your firm type first, then to map your current senior managers and certification functions between the regimes. And that's the critical part. If you haven't got that mapping, the rest of it can't follow through. So you actually need to do that as early on as possible. It's about seeing who is new, who needs to change. Once these steps have been completed, the responsibilities can be allocated. Once you know who's doing what, the required checks can be carried out with the prep for the additional requirements coming in from December. After you have this in place, or it can be in parallel, depends on where your firm is all sitting in the actual process, the training can be undertaken in parallel or as required ahead of the 9th of December deadline. As I said, we have a pack available for purchase, and that project template, which is in Excel, can help any firm tailor and kickstart their project very quickly. So we'll just move on to the next slide. As Chris has already talked about, there are 3 firm types. I understand there's just limited or core firms on the call today. But again, as Chris said, it's well worth checking. The FCA were due to contact everybody to confirm. You may have already heard. If you haven't, it's worth checking that through against the criteria now. Be very clear about what you need to be doing. So let's have a quick look at mapping the roles through. Move on to the next slide. So mapping the roles, as I said, is really important, as not all roles will exist under the new regime or automatically map across. It's one of those activities that's really easy to leave until the last minute and realise actually there's a bit to think about. So as part of the pack, I put together a mapping spreadsheet for core and enhanced firms. So there's a bit of a snapshot on the slide. This shows not just the direct maps, but the alternative mapping, as some current roles can map to more than one role under the new regime. So definitely worth having a look at all the options. We then have a brief look at the prescribed responsibilities on the next slide. So once you've been through the exercise, you've completed all the mapping, you know who's going to be taking up which parts. It's all around the prescribed responsibilities and allocating them to the relevant role. So the number of PRs will actually depend on your firm type, and as you would expect, enhanced firms have got more than core firms have got more than limited if it applies at all. So they're designed to be held by one individual per responsibility. They can be split if the role is shared, for example, if you've got part-time workers, and in practice this may need to be applied anyway if you're part of a smaller firm. Likewise, significant management certification functions may apply if you're a larger firm. So mapping all of this through is all part of the mapping spreadsheet, as well as just which roles need to be allocated. If we move on to the next slide. There are already a number of current checks in place for senior managers, and these are going to be enhanced from the 9th of December. So enhancement to the criminal record checks, you'll need to make sure your firm is registered with the DBS if you're not already. And also regulatory references are required from the 9th of December for the previous 6 years for all new appointments. So this is to prevent individuals with poor conduct records moving from firm to firm. And it's interesting reading the latest feedback from the FCA, who've actually been round and spoken to people, and they're very much about not just implementing this as a regime, but actually making it work in practice. Is it actually managing managers and getting the best out of them and making sure the best quality people are sitting within your business? If we just briefly look at the next slide, so I understand we don't have any enhanced firms on the call. So if you were, there would be certain forms to be submitted through. Form K, I was talking to a firm the other day. They are trying to get all of their information pulled together to make sure that the correct information is coming across. And yes, enhanced firms have a lot more to do. They've got to look at a responsibilities map. They need their statements of responsibility. But statements of responsibility are also required for core firms, for any firm. Because even though the FCA don't need to see these up front, they could come and ask them at any point in time. If we then move on to the next slide to just have a brief look around the forms, there are loads of forms. So if you read through the documentation, you'll see a whole list of the different forms. There's a bit of a snapshot that I've put on the side there. So these are all listed in the FCA Solo Regulated Firms Guide. There are a few advised deadlines to be aware of. From the 9th of September is when the new Form A is going to be coming in for those taking up roles after the 9th of December. They're saying that by the 9th of November, you need to have submitted all your relevant forms to the FCA using Connect. So that means for any changes that you think are coming through, you must make sure that they're all submitted in good time. And for if there are any enhanced firms, obviously beginning of December is important to make sure that all the Form K submissions are being submitted through. So it's not as clear as that's fine, I don't need to do anything. Particularly if the timescale is getting tighter and we're coming into the final 3 months, it's about making sure that you've submitted any relevant forms through in good time. Then if we come on to the slide just briefly around training. So training is key, and this is the main part for any project. It doesn't matter what kind of project you're running, the training is always key. It will be ongoing already, but it's making sure that all the relevant staff are included this time round, and that's virtually everybody apart from the ancillary staff, so the cleaners who are coming in, or people that do not have any contact with clients and their data. So there will be some internal decisions to make. For example, power planners. In some firms, power planners can have a lot of client contact and therefore need to be trained. In other firms, the power planners are only communicating via their advisors, so training may not be required. Some firms are choosing to train up and make sure that all their power planners are trained in line with the new legislation, regardless of their client interactions, the belt and braces approach. Again, it will depend on the size of your firm. Whether you have power planners based in there, you might even choose to be outsourcing. So it's just making sure you've covered everything off. Given the training can run until December 2020, it's important this is organised and it's tracked through as part of the project. You can demonstrate that this process has been worked through. So this concludes the brief overview of how you can structure your project based on your requirements. Much of this seems to be a checklist, but actually it's more than that. It's ensuring everything is concluded in the time, in the right order, coordination and management. So to finish off, Chris, if you could kind of move through the slides, you can probably skip over the next one because it's just about me and my company. So we won't linger on that one for any longer than we need to. So Chris, if you could move on to the next one. And do you want to just cover off briefly about, oh, excuse me, there we go, brilliant. So as I mentioned, we've got a pack that's available for purchase. You can see some examples on the right-hand side of the project plan, which has been set up in Excel. It's a template outline which can be tailored to how your firm can work and what's actually needed. So it covers all the key items that we showed at the beginning of the how-to section. And there's also extracts from the mapping spreadsheet and example slides to give you an idea as to what these actually look like. On the left-hand side, Chris has added in from the Model Office a number of practical guides and reports. Chris, do you want to add in any detail about what you've got included in that?
Yeah, thanks, Helen, and thanks for the succinct and clear presentation on project planning, which is really the most important thing around the SM&CR. But really what we've done here for you is we've produced 3 practical guides and 3 reports, which really, as it says, unwrap the SM&CR for you, the key elements, and hopefully makes it clear and easy to understand about what this regime is, what you need to grapple with, and then most importantly, as Helen has talked about very clearly, about what you need to do next, the how to really about implement the regime into your business. You'll tend to find that that you've got some of the key elements already in place, and that's great. But please, please, please don't do what the banks did and really assume that it's just a quick flip over from one regime to another. It's not. And as we know, when I was first joined the industry back in 1990, as I was told, assuming makes an ass of you and me. So really, it's all about understanding how the regime fits, what it means for you as a business, because your business is very different to other businesses within the industry, and then what, most importantly, you need to do next. If you're interested in this, please email us at Model Office and we can send you an overview of the pack. And if you want to purchase the pack, all you need then to do is let us know that you want to purchase the pack, and we will send through an invoice to you and then give you a digital access to the pack that you can then download and print or use accordingly from that perspective. So that really concludes today. Thanks so much for Helen for taking the time out and running through her part. Most importantly, we've got lots coming up with regard to the SM&CR. We've got 4 more workshops which are CPD accredited, and we'll let you know when they're coming up, that you can take a look at those. They will be based in London and up north in Manchester, and we've also got another suite of SM&CR implementation unwrapped workshops coming up also in October and going into November. So you'll see a lot of activity now from service providers around this. But the most important thing is that because you're on this call, you're ahead of the game, and it's just now a case of knowing what to do and when to do it and how to do it. Have a great remain part of this week, and any questions, any queries, or if you want more information on the pack, please email us on that email address bottom right. Thanks so much for taking the time out with us today.
Thank you, everyone.